And I'd be doing myself a disservice and every member of this band if I didn't perform the hell out of this.
Guess what? I got a fever. And the only prescription is more cowbell.
What process mining does is it interrogates system event logs. And it doesn't matter the system. It could be the human resources system, the ERP, the CRM system, any number of systems that help manage the business contain event logs, which record what users and machines are doing and the flow of information through the ecosystem.
Welcome to A State of Readiness, a podcast set as a fireside chat with business leaders to discuss what it takes for a company to be in a state of readiness and become a high-performance organization, with your host, Joseph Paris. Hello, and welcome to another episode of State of Readiness, a fireside chat between me, your host, Joseph Paris, and a cutting-edge thought leader. Today, that cutting-edge thought leader is John Bicknell, founder and CEO of More Cowbell Unlimited. John is a national security expert and passionate analytics visionary. He has written extensively on information warfare, critical infrastructure defense, and space situational awareness. His company uses process technologies to predict near-term outcomes of interest. Prior to his founding More Cowbell Unlimited, John served in the United States Marine Corps with deployments in Afghanistan and assignments at the Pentagon until he retired as a lieutenant colonel in 2010. John is also vice president of the Information Professionals Association and the host of the Cognitive Crucible podcast. He lives with his family in the beautiful Pacific Northwest and enjoys hiking and cliff jumping. Welcome, John, to State of Readiness. How are you doing today?
Fantastic, JP. Thanks for having me on to your fireside chat.
Well, it's we've known each other for probably over a year now. Got connected on LinkedIn like so many other people today. So it's really really great pleasure to have you, and thanks for taking the time.
Right. Yeah, you bet. I believe we got connected up via one of your other colleagues, Benjamin Taylor, who you've shared a podcast forum with as well. I heard Benjamin actually on a podcast that he was on, which dealt with cybernetics and complex systems. And via LinkedIn, I reached out to Benjamin, and somehow he introduced me to you. And several months go by, and here we are.
Yeah, that's right. Because he was thinking about having you as a candidate on the Outliers In, which is another podcast we produce. And after you and I chatted, I thought that you'd be a better fit for State of Readiness because your story is pretty interesting, and what you're doing is also pretty interesting. So yeah, here we are. Yep. So you've had a heck of a journey. Lieutenant Colonel in the Marines, retired now, yes?
That is correct. Yeah, I retired back in 2010 after just a little bit over 20 years on active duty. It was a great ride.
Excellent. And how did that come to be? I mean, how did you go to university and then enlist, or was it an ROTC program? Or
Yep, it was via Naval ROTC at Vanderbilt University. I studied civil engineering at Vanderbilt University. Rewinding before that, I come from a family that has a very deep military heritage. All the men on both sides of my family had something to do with the military, either serving in the Army on my mom's side or on my father's side. My dad was a Navy officer, and his father was a war correspondent during World War II. So, and then on back further. So I had it in my DNA to at least do something in the military. And so I joined Naval ROTC at Vanderbilt. And for those in the audience that may not be familiar, the Department of the Navy includes both the Navy and Marine Corps. And so Naval ROTC, Annapolis too, right? The Naval Academy. So right. ROTC, Naval ROTC, the midshipmen have the opportunity to either align towards becoming a Navy officer or Marine Corps officer. And so I decided to join the Marines.
So how did you make that decision? If you had the decision tree to make, what made you join the Marines over the Navy?
Well, there's a story there, JP, for sure. Like, as I said, my father was a Navy officer. And so, like lots of young boys, there's some kind of a alignment, frequently, not always, with what a parent did. So I think I probably was thinking, well, I'll go into the Navy because my father did. But while I was in Naval ROTC, I was actually not on a scholarship. And I would say something like 90% of the youngsters, the midshipmen, were on a government scholarship to go to college through ROTC, but I was not. And so I was doing what's called the college program without a scholarship. And it was after like 2 years. Yeah, and this wasn't widely known. I didn't just tell people, no, I don't have a scholarship. But this one fella, I told, just, hey, but we were drinking beers or something, and I go, yeah, by the way, I don't have a scholarship. And he was like, huh, really? Man, I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't have a scholarship. And I was doing it for like intrinsic reasons, right? It was like family heritage, patriotism. And this guy was like, this is a little jaded sounding, but it came off like he was just in it for the money.
Yeah.
He wouldn't be doing it otherwise. And that just really rubbed me the wrong way. And so it was that, and he was a Navy guy. And so it was that combined with all of my friends tended to be Marines. And so at my junior year, I decided, hey, I'm going to do the Marine thing instead of the Navy thing. So that's how I wound up in the Marine Corps. And my parents at the time were actually a little, why are you doing the Marines instead of the Navy? But it all worked out wonderfully. And they wound up supporting me too.
Yeah. So, being 20 years, certainly there must have been a forging of your character and your outlooks, and through that 20 years, did you see yourself change over that period of time?
Oh yes, very much so. Went in as a person who, as I said, had these intrinsic motivations, including patriotism, but I was also immature, 22, 23 years old.
Right.
I actually went in, joined, and I had what was called a flight contract. And so I went to flight school for my first year and a half on active duty. And that flight school didn't wind up working out for me. And that was a big hit, right? That was the first thing that I failed at in my life, right? It's like I had gone through high school, gone through college. I had, generally been successful, even, while learning lessons along the way, of course, but that was like the first failure. And so that failure was an opportunity for me to dust myself off, get drugged through the knothole of life and pop out the other side as someone who is, mentally stronger and ready to continue on despite failures. And so I actually wound up becoming in the Marine Corps what's called an adjutant, which is a human resources officer, basically. And I had a fantastic remainder of my career doing that. When I graduated college, I was like, man, I'm done with this school stuff. I am done. I am done learning. But, at the age of 22, I did not realize how much learning was going to be part of my life story. And after about 10 years in the Marine Corps, halfway through, I had the opportunity to pursue a graduate degree at the Naval Postgraduate School. And like I said, I was ready for that educational experience. And I got a degree in basically what would be called operations research. It was manpower analysis, but there was a very heavy duty operations research package bolted onto the side of it. And that educational experience carries right on through to the work I'm doing today.
So let's talk about the work that you're doing today. One of the things that really caught my attention, I got to tell you, I still chuckle about it because it resonates with me. It touches my soul. The name of your company.
That's right. Yep.
More Cowbell.
More Cowbell Unlimited. That's right. And I chose More Cowbell Unlimited because More Cowbell Consulting was already taken. I think so. I thought, well, what could I do? More Cowbell Unlimited. That sounds good. But for those in your audience, I've got a sense of humor. More Cowbell is a cultural phenomenon. It goes back to, I don't know, the mid 1990s. It was a Saturday Night Live skit. And I don't know if you do links in your show notes, but the audience can go and just YouTube More Cowbell Saturday Night Live, and the skit will pop up with like hundreds of millions of views. When I retired from the Marine Corps, I had a couple of different corporate jobs. They were great, but I got tired of working for other people. And so when I started my own business, it's like one thing I can decide upon is I can decide whatever I want to name my business. And I decided More Cowbell Unlimited. So that's the backstory on More Cowbell Unlimited.
Now, but there are a lot of those types of phrases, namings and things that have been in the genre of television and movies and just catchy things. Like, first off, I love Christopher Walken, always have. I think he's one of the best actors in the world. I mean, I just can't get enough of his watch scene in Pulp Fiction. Mm-hmm. Sorry, it cracks me up.
Yep.
But and the way he just delivers, I mean, it's almost like Captain Kirk, except a little bit more fun, if you will.
Yep.
So, sure. So out of all of that, I mean, how did why did you settle on More Cowbell? And when you saw that one was taken, you're motivated enough to try to figure out a way around that. So this is something that you really wanted.
Yeah. I've loved it for years. As a matter of fact, if the audience goes to my website and then the about page, I've got a little link to the backstory of my company. But in the backstory, there is actually a copy and paste of my email signature line from when I was deployed to Afghanistan from 2009 to 2010. And my email signature line, has Lieutenant Colonel John Bicknell, G1 of the Marine Expeditionary Brigade, blah, blah, blah. It has my phone number and email addresses and all that stuff. And down at the very bottom of that email signature area, it says More Cowbell. And on top of the more in the word More Cowbell, there's like the umlaut.
Yeah,
that Blue Oyster. So this is a Blue Oyster Cult song, which is part of the part of the skit. It's the Blue Oyster Cult song, "Don't Fear the Reaper." But for those of you who are Blue Oyster Cult fans, you'll know that on the O in oyster, there's the umlaut, and there is no backstory for that either. I think the Blue Oyster Cult band members just thought it looked cool, right? Yeah, this is rad, So anyway, it's something that's been a part of my life for a lot longer than my business name, that's for sure.
So what does your business do? Let's go down that road.
Okay, certainly. Well, we model processes, and we use those process models, and again, a very strong connection to my operations research education. We model processes. We use those process models to make predictions. It's domain agnostic, and it's what's called explainable AI, which means that a decision maker who might be unfamiliar with artificial intelligence, but you can go from the raw data through the algorithm to the results, to the decision that you're serving up to somebody, or to the suggestions that you're serving up to a decision maker. And the decision maker can understand from A to Z how you arrived at this recommendation. So at the beating heart of this capability is a technique that's called process mining. And I suspect, you could maybe confirm for me, JP, but I suspect that a lot of folks in your audience are familiar with process mining from the OpEx nature of this discussion forum. Would you say?
Well, a lot of my audience are business owners, or I don't want to say captains of industry, because most of my clients are publicly traded multinationals. Mm-hmm. But a lot of the people that I interface with are above, if you will, the processes. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Sure. What makes things work. So maybe if you wanted to, share that a little bit, how process mining, what is it, and how it fits into what it is that you do.
Yeah, sure, you bet. So process mining was developed over, say, like the last 20 years, and it's got its roots not too far from where you are right now, JP, in the Netherlands. And this Professor Wil van der Halst in the Netherlands is the godfather of process mining, and he's actually now a professor at Aachen in Germany. But he and his colleagues for many years developed process mining as a way for organizations to understand the processes which run the business. And I'm sure that folks in your audience, even the senior leaders, are familiar with Lean Six Sigma, value stream mapping, and those kinds of things. Right. And those process improvement projects typically, start out with, well, what does the process actually look like? And that frequently involves like a whiteboarding exercise with box and stick and wire diagrams, which are all very helpful to orient on process, but they also tend to be rather subjective. And what process mining does is it interrogates system event logs. And it doesn't matter the system. It could be the human resources system, the ERP, the CRM system, any number of systems that help manage the business contain event logs, which record what users and machines are doing and the flow of information through the ecosystem. And what process mining does is it interrogates system event logs. And it doesn't matter the system. It could be the human resources system, the ERP, the CRM system, any number of systems that help manage the business contain event logs, which record what users and machines are doing and the flow of information through the ecosystem. Right. And so process mining interrogates those event logs and surfaces the processes which are latent within those data. So it's objective, it's repeatable, it's scalable, it's sliceable and diceable. If you have a human resources hiring process, let's say, and it's a big organization, you can see what the overall process model looks like, but then you can chop it up into, well, what does it look like just for finance? What does it look like just for the operations folks? What does it look like for the marketing department, et cetera? So it's a more objective, scalable methodology appropriate for today to help organizations kick off like digital transformation projects and things like this.
Now, it also sounds like it illuminates the reality, because we could draw whatever pretty pictures we want on the whiteboard, and that might be what we think happens, but the process mining, as you're describing it, is going to reflect what's actually happening.
Yeah, you're taking a page right out of the process mining playbook there, JP, for sure. Right. So a subjective process mining or a subjective whiteboard exercise might not account for those things that are happening in reality. Right. So where you might sit around a table and come up with a very linear, logical process. Well, this is what should be happening, right? This is what we think we're doing. But when you look at those same processes through using process mining, you might see that core process that is actually on the whiteboard, but you'll also see all the process deviations and reworking of process steps, and those represent inefficiencies. They could potentially represent compliance challenges, which people go to jail if compliance steps are skipped or done inappropriately. So it's a way of seeing what is actually going on rather than, this is what we think is going on.
Right.
And then on top of that, the process models themselves come baked with all kinds of, not to get too technical, but all kinds of descriptive statistics, right? On average, how long does this take? On average, how long does this take? And so you can simulate that. And if an organization is contemplating some kind of a process upgrade, then you can understand empirically what is currently happening, and then you can ask those kinds of what if questions. Well, what if we were able to, speed up this step by 75%? What if we were able to eliminate this step? What if we're able to, do something else that would represent a significant process enhancement? Well, then you can put those into a new model and simulate it and do return on investment estimations, which are data driven rather than, this is what we think.
So let's talk about that for a little bit, because when I see an older company, a company that's been around a while, they've got processes, and instead of optimizing the processes, they often just keep on adding. And they usually add when something falls off the truck. Like, oh my gosh, that should never have happened. We're going to put in a whole mechanisms to ensure that it never happens again. And they just keep on cobbing it, and they make it more and more complex. And you talked about eliminating steps. I often see when I'm doing, my business, that they have all this complexity where it shouldn't exist. And it's only because instead of doing an end-to-end redesign, they kept on, it's like the Internal Revenue Code. I mean, it shouldn't be that hard, right? They just keep on adding to it and tweaking it instead, and trying to quote unquote fine tune it. When in fact, if I gave my taxes to 5 different accountants, I'm going to get 5 different answers. None of them wrong, but also none of them completely truly right either. I was at this one client years ago, and they extruded wood, and this wood would sit in this laminate would sit in a warehouse for 30 days or so to get the proper moisture content before they moved it on to the next stage in the process. Now, what we did, and the mission was to, try to reduce it as much as possible, to reduce the amount of time in this warehouse.
Compress that process step.
Compress that step. So one of the things that we did was we measured the moisture content coming out of the extruder of the wood. And it was really, really close to what it should be. So, it's like, why is it sitting in the warehouse for 30 days to begin with? Well, come to find out, which is, by the way, a very famous phrase in my line of business, come to find out, they replaced that extruder, 5 years before, to get increased capacity through it, so it extruded more. But they never bothered to test the moisture content. So for 5 years, it was almost within tolerance, and it only had to sit in the warehouse for 5 to 10 days before it could move on to the next stage. But this is when I'm looking at business processes, process optimizations, process mining, we don't have a tendency to look at things end to end.
Yeah, I can imagine that is quite a challenge. And so looking at just one system can be helpful, but inevitably a ERP system is connected to adjacent systems. And so understanding the end-to-end process, it's a data science challenge, but it's also sounds to you like it's a challenge for organizations, even if they're not using process mining, to illuminate the entire landscape of a process. Not an easy thing to do, for sure. And process mining is dependent upon data. and the kinds of processes that you were just describing, might not be housed neatly in any system.
Right.
So, there are, these real world processes that are out there that have to be measured and recorded somehow in order for, process mining to be an appropriate tool for the place that you were just describing. But
yeah. So what about technology? Where's the technology play, and how can technology accelerate, or is there a potential for it to be a hindrance in these processes?
Well, I'll answer the first one, or the second question first. Is that sure, technology can be a hindrance in that people chase shiny objects, right? Squirrel. So organizations can fall victim to that kind of a thing. But I would say, on balance, the technology that is rolling out and is being operationalized is glorious enhancements for businesses and for governments. There's a proliferation of various different sensors to be able to measure the kinds of things that you were just describing, wood, humidity in wood. I forget exactly how you described it, but to be able to measure those kinds of things and put them into systems in ways that have never been done before. So double-edged sword, but on balance, I would say technology is providing the ways for clever businesses to capitalize on new methods for decision making.
Right. I had the privilege of meeting with some of the guys from McLaren Racing, and speaking of sensors, and the amount of sensors they put in their vehicles, to monitor and manage the telemetry of that vehicle as it's going across the track. Now, mind you, they can't use these sensors in an actual race, but to practice, to fine tune the vehicle, to experiment and see what the cause and effects are of those experiments. It's pretty fascinating stuff. And, they're able to capture however many sensors they want to put on the car, measuring however many variants or variables. It's just the amount of data harvesting they do in real time is just simply amazing.
Right. Yeah. Two observations I have there. Well, one includes a story. So first, the observation about sensors is that this proliferation of sensors coming right along with that is a proliferation of data. And so you've heard people for years talk about big data. Well, big data 10, 15 years ago is nothing compared to the tsunami of data that exists today, and that's only growing as well. So the tools and techniques needed for sense making, to have AIs and machines process this avalanche of data which is coming at analysts is more necessary today than it has ever been. That's point number one. But we actually did a project modeling whales, the animal, the mammal in the water. We worked with researchers from Oregon State University, and these guys and gals go out every year and they put sensors on whales, telemetry devices on whales that measure all kinds of things. But what we modeled was the whale diving and foraging habits. And specifically, we looked at that under different periods of solar activity. Our sun, our sun is its own process, right? Your audience may not know this, but during the course of this project, I learned a lot about the sun. The sun has solar cycles, and we actually just started solar cycle 25. It's like,
Yeah, like 17 years or something like that, isn't it?
Close, very good. It's about 11 years.
Okay.
And it's not exact. It's like,
Yeah.
all this is fuzzy, but it's, it's got its own seasonality. Anyway, the sun, belches out the solar wind and protons and coronal mass ejections and all these different things. So what we did was we modeled the whale's behavior during different periods of solar activity, on days that are quote unquote normal, typical, low solar activity versus days that have high solar activity. And we looked at that as a process. And we found that, there are statistically significant differences in the way whales behave during those different solar periods. And again, you can see this in the process models, right? You can see how the activities change, the tempo of the activities, the rate of the change of activities. And we actually talked with a researcher from the Office of Naval Research about this, and he said, "Yeah, it's pretty interesting." And he hypothesized this. This is maybe just a little bit of a tangent, but he hypothesized that, it may not be that the sun is affecting the whales themselves, but it's really affecting the krill and the plankton that the whales feed on. And so if the krill and the plankton are more scattered or they're more condensed, I don't know, what exactly it would be, then that is what is affecting the whale's behavior. So, but anyway, that's when you were talking about the proliferation of sensors and whatnot, that's a real world example of how you can use process mining to measure things that would have been very difficult to measure without the kinds of sensor technology that's coming online.
Now, a lot of sensors, if we go beyond the physical for a second and think about software sensors.
Mm-hmm.
We have data, we have information streaming all the time. And there's software that exists that could be created that is going to look for a confluence of events that's going to cause a trigger. Mm-hmm. So it's monitoring the flow of data, the value of the data, and when there is a situation in the data that is atypical or something that they want to flag for, it could cause a response. Yeah. I'm thinking about. Certainly cybersecurity is part of it. You're looking at a steady stream of data, and if something all of a sudden is atypical, it could possibly be a threat, and especially if it's corroborated by other known types of threats.
Yeah, 100% on that. So that, this is something that we're working on actually with the United States Space Force, is to do something along these lines. But talking to the kinds of things that it's appropriate for a number of domains. So if someone can model a corporate ecosystem, right? Let's just hand waving here, right? Because these are not trivial problems. But let's just say that you can model a corporate ecosystem and imagine this crazy process model, but this process model kind of has a life of its own, if you will. Monday through Friday, you've got this process, but let's call this normal or typical, right?
Right.
And if you can understand the typical flow of information in an organization statistically, right, and then all of a sudden something changes, that can be observed as well. And whomever would be the person that would care about that, other than the CEO, the security officer, whomever it is, can get an alert that says something's going on here that requires investigation. And so that would be a way for organizations to stay abreast of what's happening within their ecosystem. This
Right.
kind of thing would be really appropriate for social media monitoring. More organizations these days are putting out these social media listening posts to monitor the social media ecosystem that surrounds the organization. What are people tweeting about us? What are people blogging about us? Those types of things. Well,
right.
Just as I was describing, that can be modeled and monitored consistently to understand, the typical drumbeat of messaging, and even how various different stimuli affect the ecosystem. But if something happens which is statistically out of the norm, then that would be something that the media team would want to know about, the marketing team would want to know about what's happening here, so that they can get ahead of whatever kind of potential media avalanche is coming their way with appropriate messaging. And I think that smart organizations are starting to look at that kind of brand protection, if you will, brand maintenance, because I don't have to tell you and your audience this, but I will. Organizations work very hard to develop whatever brand is, and that they are that aligns with their strategy. And we're finding today that brands can get torpedoed very quickly if they're not managed appropriately.
I got to share with you something that's been happening with me over the last 3 or 4 weeks. And I don't know why I was able to physically recognize this, but I own the Operational Excellence group on LinkedIn, and it's approaching 100,000 members. So it's a pretty sizable group on LinkedIn as far as LinkedIn groups are concerned. And I approve the people that apply to join it. And so there might be 50, 60, 100 people a day that want to join it. Okay. And usually it's pretty quick work to approve it. The criterion for being approved is fairly nominal. You have to have a complete profile. You have to have at least 20 connections, and you can't be a company. I only allow individuals into my group. So it's, fairly low bar, if you will. But I started seeing some profiles that just didn't look right. The pictures of the people didn't look right. They looked real, but there was just something a little off about them. And then I started looking at the patterns of how the profiles were configured. And they're all like, they had 3 positions, each one with a, Fortune 500, household name company. They each had 2 languages that they knew. But they had some, funky little, the subtitles of what they were doing, life coach, and they look like you're in their 20s. All right. So how can you be a life coach when you're, 25 years old? Or humanitarian relief, recruiter, or, just something very, very odd. And so I started blocking these people because I just didn't trust them. And by the way, they're all young ladies, pictures of young ladies, probably in the 25 to 30-year-old range. All right. Then I start hearing about deep fakes. I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but deep fake is basically an artificial intelligence generated persona. Okay. And very, very hard to tell the real ones from the fake ones. But if you looked at my blocked list, you would see like these are the Stepford wives. You know what I mean? They all just they just somehow looked plastic, and they're so now that I know the pattern to look for, they're really easily recognized on the people that want to join. But they all had like 500 connections, but almost none of them were connections with me. Okay, or second degree, I should say second degree connections with me. So if you know me, I got like 10 or 11,000 people in my personal network.
Right.
And if they want to join my operational excellence group, the chances of them being a 3rd level connection are fairly remote, because they're probably going to be connected to somebody that's connected to me. But there was that absence of common connections too.
Right.
And
go ahead.
So all of this just, and by the way, I don't know why they would want to join my group, okay, except perhaps to gain access to the people in my group, which, by the way, are probably 75% male and 40 years old or older.
Right. Yeah. What you just described to me sounds to me like the power of human sense making. Nothing beats human sense making, especially when it comes to stitching together a whole bunch of disparate clues that seemingly don't seem to be terribly related. Like, oh, it's all women. They all seem to be pretty young. My group is actually not like that. They have these funky job descriptions that the words make sense, but when you put it all together, it's like, that don't make sense. Machines can do that if they have a sufficient amount of what's called like labeled data.
Right.
If there's enough people like you who, go through a whole bunch of these, bogus and real profiles and say, real, bogus, real, bogus. That's the labeling of data. Then machines can start, identifying these bogus people. But it takes a human to first examine these kinds of things and say, hey, hang on a second. And so the power of human sense making is still critical in the world. And all of this artificial intelligence and sensors and all this stuff, as I mentioned, it's a glorious advancements for humanity.
Yeah.
But one of the most pressing agendas these days is, as I said a moment ago, is using machines to do what machines can do better than people. And that's crunching through all of this data and serving up insights. But then what that does is that frees up the people, the most valuable resource, the people and the human brain and the human sense making, to do what humans are best at doing. And that is the kind of thing that corporate leaders are especially interested in.
Yeah. So where do you see the industry going?
Yeah. So operationalizing what I was just describing there. And, back to the beginning of the discussion, I tend to come at things from a national security perspective. And most of my work today is applying the process technologies I was describing to national security problems. And so that is something that the United States National Security, Department of Defense, intelligence community establishment is like yelling for. To try to give back time to analysts so that the people can do what people are better at doing and let the machines do what the machines are better at doing. And I've listened to a number of these discussions. I've read a good bit of your blog. I don't want to say a good bit. I've probably read just a tiny bit, but I know that you talk about the OODA loop frequently. And so it's observe, orient, decide, act. Colonel John Boyd, Air Force colonel from the 1950s and 60s, was the gentleman who socialized and was the big thinker on this. But it's also back to our beginning of our conversation with Benjamin Taylor and cybernetics and these feedback loops and speeding up that OODA loop cycle so that organizations, whether it's the Department of Defense or a corporation, they can outcompete their adversaries so that making better, faster decisions. And that is where I see all of this going.
Yeah, but the better and the faster really does come down to trust and understanding, doesn't it? I mean, do you trust and do you understand and trust your surroundings, the assets that are at your disposal, what isn't at your disposal? In one of my workshops, I asked people, how much data do you have to collect and analyze in order to absolutely guarantee with certainty an outcome? And it leaves them puzzled. I mean, they just eventually the answer is infinite amounts of data and infinite amounts of analysis of that data to absolutely guarantee with certainty an outcome. Mm-hmm. But we don't have that much time, right? Before we make a decision.
Don't have that much time, don't have that much data, don't have that much computing power, on and on and on. Right. So their uncertainty is ever present. And
right.
It's whether you can compress that a little bit so that you have a little bit more confidence to just
confidence. That's it. That's exactly the answer. So ultimately, at the end of the day, we make our decisions when our level of confidence exceeds our level of fear.
Sure.
You know, and that means that the more we understand and the more we trust one another, our organizations, our apparatus, our capability to execute, the quicker we can make those decisions. And compressing time will give you the competitive advantage today.
Right. And also to foot stomp another point that I made, it's like not only trusting, the information from the external environment and all of that, but also trusting the artificial intelligence as well. There are, again, phenomenal advancements in artificial intelligence, but a lot of it winds up being what's called black box AI. These, neural networks that are, make tremendous predictions, but it's impossible currently, at least, to explain, what exactly is the artificial intelligence doing that is prompting, these decision courses of action for me. And
Right.
so having an artificial intelligence that a decision maker can understand the entire supply chain, if you will, of processing is helpful.
Yeah, right. So I guess we're getting towards the end of our session here, John. So just a couple of closing speed questions.
Let's do it.
All right. You ready for the first one?
Rock and roll.
Who is a person that you admire or look up to the most, and why?
Well, so first of all, my wife. I would have to start there, and that's not a throwaway answer. I mean, I wouldn't have started my business if it were not for my wife. When I grew up, I knew that it was possible to have a business or to start a business, but for whatever reason, during my upbringing, that was something that just wasn't something that I vectored in on. And so it wasn't until I was in my late 40s, after the Marine Corps, after having a few corporate jobs, where my wife always had this an entrepreneurial streak in her. And so by watching and observing the way she does her business and her encouragement as well, it's like, I can go for this, and I can sing my song, and that's what I'm doing now. Because of her, I consider myself today to be like a happy warrior, if you will. I feel like I'm doing what I was intended to do, what I was put on earth to do, and that's to do something interesting and relevant, something I think I'm good at doing, something that is needed in the world. I've got two daughters, and I've always told my daughters, you need to figure out, like a Venn diagram of three things, or maybe four things. It's like, find something that you enjoy doing, find something that you're good at doing, and find something that you can make money doing. Yes. The sweet spot is right there in the middle of all that. And maybe you could add in and something that is needed in the world. So add on a fourth little Venn diagram thing. So anyway, I would say my wife.
Well, if it's not needed, you're not going to make money at it, right?
That's right. Yeah. There's a really cool graphic that illuminates all of that.
Yeah.
And it goes into more detail. It's like, well, if you have all these components, but this one's missing, well, then that means that you might lack like a feeling of purpose. And if you have everything, but this one is missing, well, then that means you might lack a sense of agency, or, I forget all of the various different call outs on that, Venn diagram, but yeah, just what you said.
Cool. So this is sometimes a little sticky one here. If you had one thing to do over, if you had one do-over in the world, in your entire life, one do-over, what would it be, and why, and what would you do different?
I would take a gap year between either high school and college, or between college and going into the workforce. Because there's the old saying that youth is wasted on the young. And I've had a great life. There's no doubt about it. But if I could have a do-over there, I would want to just have a year of screwing off and backpacking through Europe. And I don't know how I would finance it, but just like something like that. But I would have loved to have had a gap year like that. And I would probably advise my daughters today against doing that. Back in 1986 or 87 or 1991 or 92, a young kid from America, just beat feeting around the world or hitchhiked across America or something like that. That's knowing what I know about myself. I would max that out. And that opportunity is gone. And so now I can only relive those by reading other people's journals, I guess.
Good. Well, listen, John, I want to thank you for taking the time to join me today on my podcast. You've been an outstanding guest with great stories and great insights. I wish you all the best, and I'm sure our paths will continue to cross.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, JP. Love it. And I look forward to continue learning from the OPEX community and the podcast that you have.
More cowbell, man. More cowbell.
That's right. I've got a fever.
That's right. The world needs more cowbell.
Yeah, the only prescription is more cowbell. That is exactly right.
All right. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.
All right. You too.
Thank you for listening to State of Readiness. You can discover more episodes and learn about the book written by Joseph Paris of the same title at www.state-of-readiness.com. You can learn more about Joseph Paris at www.josephparis.me/card.